Good evening, and welcome to the first in a series of candidate forums focused on the upcoming LA City election, and in particular, the issues which are of greatest concerns to the Los Angeles Jewish community. My name is Jeffrey Abrams, and I'm the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League's Los Angeles region. As one of our nation's oldest civil rights organization, ADL is committed to both stopping the defamation of the Jewish people and helping to secure justice and fair treatment to all. Today, ADL's work includes fighting anti-Semitism, domestic extremism, and authoritarianism, as well as strengthening a democratic process which seems to be constantly under assault. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and by your presence here this evening, it is an important step in helping to ensure that there is an informed electorate at a time when Los Angelinos are facing so many challenges. We welcome and thank the candidates who have joined us this evening for what we hope will be an informative forum. We believe that partnership in the Jewish community is critical, perhaps now more than ever, and ADL is proud to co-sponsor tonight's forum with the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles and the American Jewish Committee. It is now my pleasure to introduce AJC Los Angeles Regional Director, Richard Hirschhout.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening. As glimmers of hope steadily emerge from the pandemic, Angelinos of all backgrounds are contemplating the rhythms of the new normal in our post-quarantine society. The question of what kind of city we will be looms large. The COVID-19 crisis shone a bright light upon the better angels of our city of angels, from the selfless, brave, and undaunted doctors, nurses, and allied healthcare professionals to the usually unheralded grocery clerks, restaurant workers, and delivery people. Yet we also saw a dark underbelly of Los Angeles emerge in certain quarters, manifested in unrelenting and insidious appeals to prejudice and scapegoating, from anti-Asian bias to anti-Semitism. The pandemic laid bare structural cracks in our society, inequities in access to quality health care, especially among minority populations, vulnerability of immigrants and refugees, and especially in Los Angeles, a growing homeless population now at even greater risk. If we are to give voice to the oft-stated mantra that we really are all in this together, a precept of our faith tradition, we must recommit ourselves to being truly responsible for one another. Let us dare to imagine a better Los Angeles, a more compassionate Los Angeles, built upon shared values and a boundless sense of humility and gratitude for the blessing of our lives. If ever there was a moment to make this vision a reality, it is now. Let us draw upon the wisdom of the sage Hillel. If not now, when? AJC is proud to co-sponsor this evening's forum. We look forward to a thoughtful exchange that inspires us all to build a better city. It is now my pleasure to introduce my dear colleague, Rabbi Noah Farkas, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Jeff, for your partnership, and thank you to all the candidates for joining us this evening. Rabbi Noah Farkas, I'm the President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. We're an over 100-year-old charity that has tried to foster and help support a flourishing Jewish community. Our leadership programs, including the Rautenberg New Leadership Project, of which we try to engage the next generation of Jewish leaders and those who are allied with us in civic engagement. Among other leadership programs that we invest our time and the community's philanthropy in, is the purpose of those programs are to create a robust civic culture, which we all know that civics is the basis of democracy. In order for us to understand leadership, in order for us to understand what it means to be part of a larger Jewish community and a larger Los Angeles community that attempts to pour our lives into each other, that attempts to make a better tomorrow. We have to train leaders, and we have to engage in the everyday blocking and tackling of democracy. And that doesn't exist just on the federal level or on the state level or the county level. The municipal level of government is actually the most important level of government, because it's where literally the rubber meets the road. It's where citizens can engage with a local leader that they seek to represent them on the greatest issues facing them every single day. It's our honor and our pleasure to partner with the ADL and the AJC, historic partners of ours, in helping create a better Los Angeles for all, and certainly through a Jewish lens. And it is our pleasure to welcome the candidates for CD5. And finally, I'd like to please welcome our moderator for this evening's candidate forum, ABC 7's Emmy Award-winning anchor, David Ono.
Rabbi Farkas, thank you so much. And thank you, ADL and AJC and the Jewish Federation of the Greater Los Angeles area. I am pleased to be here. I'm sitting over in a little green room just off of our studio. I was on the air just a little while ago, and we'll go back there in a little while. But I was really looking forward to this forum to learn about these candidates. And I will tell you that their resumes are impressive, intelligent people with a lot of ideas. So I'm looking forward to hearing those ideas and hearing how they respond to some of these questions. Now, the Jewish vote will be critical in the Los Angeles City Council District 5, which includes parts of Bel Air, Westwood, Palms, Pico Robertson, the Fairfax area, and welcome the candidates to today's events. Before we start, though, I do want to note that ADL Los Angeles, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, and the American Jewish Committee of Los Angeles are nonpartisan 501c3 organizations. They do not endorse or oppose individual candidates, nor support a specific party. They do not take sides in electoral politics, and remarks made do not reflect the organization's positions. All right, with that said, though, let's welcome the candidates. We have Jimmy Biblars, Scott Yebri, and Katie Young Yaroslavsky. Thank you all and welcome. So today's candidate forum will include 4 moderated questions and a question from each sponsoring organization. Candidates will have 90 seconds, a minute and a half, to respond per question. There will be a rapid fire round at the end of the forum, as well as a final audience sourced question. So get your questions into the Q&A function of this webinar, and then we'll be able to ask that near the end of this forum. And with that said, we will get this forum started. Each candidate will be given 90 seconds to provide an opening statement, and we want to begin with Mr. Biblars. You will go first.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jimmy Biblars. I'm very proud to be here tonight. I think a lot about my late grandfather, who died at the very beginning of this campaign. That is the origin of Biblars. It's a bit of a hard name to pronounce, and I used to joke with my grandfather that they fled Poland and it used to be Biblarski, and it's the only time they Americanized the last name and they made it more difficult to pronounce. So it's just 2 syllables, just like it looks. I'm running to make Los Angeles a place where everyone can afford to thrive. My political origin story starts in Pico Robertson. I grew up in a small duplex apartment on Cardiff Avenue in the heart of Jewish LA. And when I was 12, my family was evicted from our half of the unit. We were chased around the city by housing affordability, and both my parents struggled very seriously with substance use in the aftermath. That experience and that confrontation with inequality, coupled with queer coming of age under the dark cloud of Proposition 8, instilled in me a belief in the power of politics and social movements to see real change, but also in how important politics are for my own life and for the lives of people who matter to me. I've been working in research and activism ever since. I was at Harvard for college and graduate school and law school after K-12 schools, all in CD5, LAUSD, born and bred. I'm now a professor at UCLA Law School, where my specialties are local government law and constitutional law. I'm eager to be here tonight and to talk about all of the issues most germane to these communities, as well as to the larger CD5 community. Thank you very much. And I will ask, is there a timer that's going to be shown?
There is supposed to be a timer. I didn't see it, but if worse comes to worse, I'll start taking the time. And then what I'll do is I'll let you get close to the end so I don't so much interrupt you. And then I'll give you like 10 seconds. How about that? and then I'll wrap you up, let you finish your final thought until we get that timer fixed. Mr. Biblars, thank you so much, and thanks for the clarification on how to say your name. And now, Mr. Epstein, can you join us?
Absolutely. It's so wonderful to be here, and thank you to the AJC, the Jewish Federation, and the ADL for hosting this forum tonight. I am running for city council to make LA work for all of us. And I will bring leadership to the council that is grounded in community, guided by compassion, and focused on results. I'm a public policy professional by trade. I've worked as a researcher at UCLA and the RAND Corporation, and I'm a seasoned longtime community leader. I was the chair of the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council, which represents the Fairfax District, for 7 years. And I'm also the founder of the Midtown Los Angeles Homeless Coalition, which has been working to connect our unhoused neighbors with services and housing in the service-poor Midtown region of Los Angeles. My priorities are making this city affordable, ending homelessness in a compassionate way, and making sure our city makes due on its promises around climate change. In particular, building a 21st century multimodal transportation system for our city. And I have made substantial progress on those issues as a community leader. We brought millions of dollars into the Fairfax District for safer streets via grant funding from Metro Los Angeles. And I am partially responsible for some of the only temporary and permanent supportive housing projects coming and existing in Council District 5. I will bring that can-do spirit to the City Council. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, let me reset my clock. And now, Mr. Yebri, if I'm saying that correctly, please correct me.
You did. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Yebri. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank our wonderful hosts this evening, the ADL, AJC, and the Jewish Federation, three of the most important and impactful organizations, not only in the LA Jewish community, but in the greater landscape of nonprofits in Los Angeles and frankly, nationally. I'm proud to have fought against hate and anti-Semitism as a past board member of the ADL, worked to advocate for the US-Israel relationship with the AJC, and the Jewish Federation has touched my life, from helping resettle my family as refugees from Iran, from funding Birthright and Hillel, which inspired me as a college student, and to my more recent work chairing the Jewish Federation's New Leaders Project that Rabbi Farkas mentioned, and including chairing the Legal Division dinner recently. The fact that AJC, ADL, and the Federation are actually working so closely together speaks volumes to its current leadership. So kudos to Rick, Jeff, and Noah. My story is the story of Los Angeles. I arrived to Los Angeles when I was a year old as refugees from Iran. I went from local public schools in 5th District to Yale and USC for law school. And I've spent the last 2 decades fighting to improve Los Angeles as a lawyer and business owner, city commissioner, and nonprofit leader. I built housing for adults with special needs, advocated for tenants with Bethesda Legal Services, chaired the Jewish Community Foundation's COVID Relief Grants Committee in 2020, and served my community in Westwood on the board of our local library and board of neighborhood association. Meanwhile, my wife and I and our 4 young kids have watched the city that we love decline. And endless musical chairs of career politicians, their family members, and their staffers have allowed homelessness, poverty, crime, and corruption to explode in our city. And that's why I'm running, to fight for the safe, vibrant city that we all deserve.
Mr. Yebri, thank you so much. And now, Ms. Yaroslavsky.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much to the AJC, the Jewish Federation, and ADL for hosting tonight's conversation. I was born in the district, raised on the west side in the San Fernando Valley. I was bat mitzvahed at Stephen Weiss Temple, where my grandparents, Fred and Florence Plotkin, were founding members. And my husband and our 3 young kids now live in Mid-City. We're members of ECAR and Temple Beth Am, are affiliated with the JCC, and send our kids to Jewish preschool and day school. I'm an environmental attorney and regional policymaker. I'm running because we need effective, ethical, and proven leadership on the council. I spent 10 years in the private and nonprofit sector, and for the last 6 years, I've been a senior policy advisor to Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, where I created LA County's first sustainability office, a utility called the Clean Power Alliance, and one of our region's largest jobs and infrastructure programs, Measure W, which is building new parks and water infrastructure across LA County. I'm collaborative, pragmatic, and I don't care who gets the credit. And this is the only way we're going to get big things done, when you need 7 other council members to agree with you. I understand the nuances and the biggest issues we're facing because I've worked on many of them for nearly 20 years. None of these challenges are impossible to solve, but they won't be easy. And collaboration and coming to the job with a clear sense of how hard it's going to be and how we're going to make real progress are going to be key. I have a proven record of coalition building and problem solving. It's why I have the support of the LA County Federation of Labor, the Sierra Club, Congresswoman Bass, Senator Allen, former Assemblyman Friedman, Congressman Mel Levine, Supervisor Kuehl, and hundreds of community leaders. I'm looking forward to our conversation this evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky. We appreciate that. Okay, so we want to get to our questions now, and I know the candidates do not know the questions in advance, and so we're going to try to keep it as fair as possible. We will rotate the order. So if you went first on the one question, you'll go last in the next, and so forth. But I do have an order here all set up. Hopefully, we'll get through that cleanly. So just to let you know, I'm going to stay with the same order for this first question. Okay, so we will begin with Mr. Biblars. And here is the first question from the moderator. In recent years, it seems like our politics have become more toxic and made us more divided. What will you do to foster a more cohesive and cooperative city government? And how will you work with others to ensure that things get done? Mr. Biblars.
Thank you so much for the question. You know, at the outset of this race, I thought it would feel quite divisive or partisan, despite being a nonpartisan election. And I'll tell you, over the course of the last year, I have never felt less partisan or ideological than I have in the conversations I've had with voters. And that's the beauty of local politics compared to national politics. Because at the local level, we all agree on the endpoints. Everybody wants clean and safe streets, good schools, housing that regular people can afford, and less traffic. Having agreement about the endpoints is half the battle, and that doesn't exist in national politics. In local politics, we disagree about the routes and the tactics, and there's a lot more room for compromise and learning and creative messaging when we agree on where we're trying to go, and it's just a question of how we get there. And I've worked very, very hard over the course of this campaign to bring in and learn from as many hostile voices as I possibly could. That we have talked to groups that are not naturally aligned with some of our views on housing, on homelessness and whatnot, and I'm better for it. And it has been generative and humbling and exciting. That is the kind of council person I will be. That's the kind of energy I will bring, because I know that in Council District 5, people's views are not nearly as hardened as we might expect at the outset, and that through creative messaging, real listening, and making people feel like they matter, you can bring so many people into your tent. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. And now, Mr. Epstein.
Thank you so much for the question. It's very near and dear to my heart because I have been a community leader and an elected official in Council District 5 for almost a decade. And I've led hundreds of Brown Act protected meetings. I led the largest neighborhood council board in the whole city, 35 board members. And unlike the city council, often we were not voting in lockstep with a lot of diverse points of view. How do you make people feel comfortable? It's by creating a transparent process where everybody feels like they have a say. Where everybody is engaged. And I think the most important thing we can do to make our politics less toxic is engage as many voices as possible. I'm really optimistic about this in Los Angeles. We've moved from an odd year electorate to an even year electorate, and we've seen turnout boost incredibly, go from 15% to 60%. We need to continue that work of getting more voices at the table and offering a whole menu of community engagement options for folks. Because not everybody wants to come to a contentious land use meeting, right? Some folks want to engage in other ways that might feel more constructive to them. And I think the more options we can give them, the more voices leaders like us will hear, and that will improve our policy making. Thanks.
Mr. Epstein, thank you. Mr. Yebri.
I think there's been a real loss of trust in our elected officials. We need leaders who are going to say the same thing to every group, not and tell groups what they want to hear. Also, we need to root out the corruption and cronies and the conflicts of interest that have taken root in City Hall. And that's why I'm leading by example. I decided to not take any money from anyone who has business before the city council, real estate developers, PACs, corporations, fossil fuel companies. I know some of the other candidates in this race have followed my lead on this issue, and I put out a comprehensive plan on governance reform as well. We need to bring people together, and that's what I've done professionally and as a nonprofit leader over the last 20 years. I'm a litigator by trade. I'll go to war for my clients. I'm also a mediator. I know how to bring people together around shared interests. And as a nonprofit leader, I've actually worked with AJC, ADL, and Federation in interfaith work to bring people together. I started a nonprofit in the Iranian American community to bring people together to engage us in civic life. I've actually I'm the only person, a candidate in this race who's actually served in a nonprofit in the Jewish community, or actually founded one as well, focused on civic engagement in an immigrant community. And finally, it's about coalition building. I'm the only candidate in this race who's endorsed by both labor unions and business groups, by both progressives and moderates, champions like Holly Mitchell and Henry Waxman, Nanette Berrigan, but also moderates like Curran Price and Joe Buscaino. 1,400 leaders in the 5th District have endorsed me, who lead nonprofits and are in the community, because I've done the work in my community for 20 years, and it's time for change from the outside.
Fantastic. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. So politics and policymaking is about relationships and coming to the job with integrity and being transparent and clear about where we're going and how we're going to get there. The way we move past the toxic culture you described, David, is through civility and coalition building, relationship building, and making sure people feel invested. We do it by electing adults. I'll lead on the council the same way I've led major initiatives at the county. So for example, I want to talk briefly about Measure W, which I mentioned in my introduction. Over a period of about 3 years, from 2015 to the fall of 2018, I led the development, negotiation, and ultimate adoption of a program called Measure W. It was on the November 18 ballot, the Safe Clean Water Program. It was adopted with almost 70% of the vote. And I was able to bring together a bunch of different constituencies, labor, business leaders, 85 of LA County's 88 cities, and hundreds of community-based organizations that came together. We had a really iterative, inclusive process. People had ownership of the pieces that they cared about in the program. And ultimately, we got to a place where there was no funded opposition. And folks have been trying to do something like this for 30 years. And we were ultimately able to do it by being incredibly transparent and open to letting other people lead on things, take credit for things. And that's how we move past this politics, is by being inclusive, bringing people in, not caring who gets the credit. That's the only way we're going to get all the stuff done we need to get done, because the problems we're facing as a city aren't problems that the city of LA can solve on its own. We need to be partnering all the way up to the federal government and with the 87 other cities in LA County. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question now, we will begin with Mr. Epstein, and then I'll shift the order. So here we go. Communities across the region have been hit hard by the pandemic, with challenges ranging from housing to unemployment to safety. What will you do to help foster relationships between diverse communities in our cities to create more understanding and collaboration? Again, we begin with Mr. Epstein.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think that this pandemic has laid bare a lot of the systemic challenges in Los Angeles that have festered for decades, right? So we learned something, about our housing crisis and how it connects to public health. Folks that were living in overcrowded conditions were more likely to get COVID and have very serious health outcomes. And that was born out of a housing crisis that's been building for a long time, because we haven't built enough housing in Los Angeles, particularly in places like Council District 5, which is one of the most expensive districts in the whole city. And a very exclusionary place in many ways, unfortunately. It's hard for people to be able to afford to live in Council District 5. So I think one of the ways that we move forward is recognizing these historical trends and trying to right them. Unfortunately, the lack of housing in CD5 is fueling displacement and gentrification all across our city, because we are a jobs-rich area, and people want to live here. And if they can't afford to live here, they're going to go to South LA and East LA. And that's going to drive up prices there. attacking issues like housing policy is one way that we can bridge that divide. Thanks, David.
Thank you. All right. And now, Mr. Yebri.
So we need to move forward by actually solving problems as a city, improving the lives of all Angelenos. We cannot allow problems to continue to get worse. And that's exactly what City Hall has been doing for a very long time, and frankly, the county as well. So let's talk about housing, since Scott brought it up. For the last decade plus, I've been fighting for tenants on the board of Betzedek Legal Services as a pro bono lawyer as well. I think it's imperative that if you're a low income resident tenant in Los Angeles, the city provide a lawyer for you at no cost. I believe in the right to counsel, and that's something that I will champion as a city council member, because you should not be evicted just because you don't understand the eviction process. I've also helped build supportive and affordable housing for adults with special needs in the 5th district for vulnerable populations. We need to be in the business of solving problems and navigating the city maze. There are issues on people's minds that we actually have to get to the bottom of, including crime. It's next to homelessness. It is a top issue that I hear from every single day from people of Los Angeles, regardless of where they live, whether they're a homeowner or a renter. And we need to stop demonizing police officers and defunding them, and making sure they have the resources to keep us safe and make sure that they do their job in the right way. And then the other big issue facing our city, mental health. There is a massive population of people who are suffering in our streets and throughout our city with addiction and mental health crises. And the city of Los Angeles doesn't have the tools to help them because it's the county's job. And the county of Los Angeles is failing. And as a result, 5 people a day who are experiencing homelessness are dying on the streets, and we need a better solution, and it's time for new leaders.
Thank you. Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
So collaboration has sort of become a theme of my campaign, because we're facing challenges that we can't solve on our own. Certainly the council member for Council District 5 can't solve these big challenges on his or her own. And the only way we're going to solve these challenges together, right? And so the last 2 years, we've all spent a lot of time alone in our homes, if we're fortunate enough to have been able to work from home. We've been sequestered, and now we're starting to come back together. And I think that's really important and healthy, because we need to be recognizing together how critical it is that we tackle these challenges together. For instance, let's talk about public safety. You know, there's been an increase in crime in the 5th. A lot of the people committing the crimes are coming from other parts of the city. And so when we talk about, say, public safety, we need to take a regional approach to it. We need to be not only investing in a well-staffed, well-trained, accountable police department, which we need to be doing, but we also need to be investing in other communities around Los Angeles to make sure people who live there have the resources they need. One of the most important jobs of a council member is to create a space for conversations to happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. It's something that the organizations hosting this conversation tonight do really well. And I think that local government should do that as well. I remember Rabbi Farkas and I had breakfast a couple of years ago, right before COVID hit, and we had a conversation about this, how important it is that government also creates spaces for these conversations to happen. We need to develop trust. And the only way we can do that is by coming together and getting to know each other as people. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Biblars.
I have 3 main points in answering this question. First is making sure the Council District 5 is welcoming and inclusive of all people. That means preserving the existing diversity that exists here and expanding it to give more people an opportunity to live in the vibrant and highly resourced neighborhoods of Council District 5. It's about a project of racial and economic integration that allows the opportunities that exist in this Council District 5 to be shared more broadly. That makes our community better, and it makes our ties stronger. Second, and perhaps most importantly, is investing in restorative justice and hate prevention educational models that form the core of ongoing trust between communities that often disagree. It's about doubling down on these difficult and frank conversations and ensuring that city and public safety resources are proactively, rather than just reactively, invested in the deep root causes of hate and violence. That is the only way to build understanding and reduce hate over time. No one knows that reality more acutely than the sponsors of this event tonight, most of whom programs are at the very forefront of these conversations. And third, it's about making political participation vastly more easy in our city. We need to bring more people in. So often, the loudest voice in the room is best represented in city policy, but we must always remember that the loudest voice does not necessarily speak for the majority. And we need to be encouraging
10
more
seconds.
people to come into the conversation, because when you have more voices in the room, it gets everyone's gears going and it makes people think beyond their own self, their own small community, and toward our broader city and our shared values. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to our third question. Mr. Yebri, you will be the first to answer. So here we go. And I understand there is a little bit of overlap on some of these issues, as you would probably well understand. As we all know, this is the question, as we all know, Los Angeles is facing a major housing crisis. What are your plans for creating more affordable housing and helping the unhoused transition to more permanent housing? And please be specific. And again, we begin with Mr. Yebri.
Okay, so for decades, Los Angeles, and specifically the 5th District, has failed to build enough affordable and workforce housing. I think of my 4 kids and wonder how they're going to afford to live in this city that we love. Housing costs are crushing families, including the most vulnerable among us. The challenge is, simply put, it's just not affordable to build affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles. Land, labor, and material costs are skyrocketing. And instead of creating more innovative approaches to housing and streamlining the process, the city has made it cumbersome and slow and expensive, a massive maze of funding sources. And so as a result, carrying costs and lawyer and legal fees are drowning projects that could be otherwise good projects in the city. I've done this work as a board member with Beth Tzedek to help keep people in their homes. I've built supportive housing as a board member of EDA. We need to do 3 things on the affordable housing piece. We need to preserve affordable housing units that exist. We have to acquire at more low-cost price points for housing that's on the market, and then build affordable housing with urgency. These projects cannot languish in the back of the line behind luxury market projects. There's a lot more to be said. I want to transition to homelessness, right? So there's prevention, which is incredibly important. It's the best use of our dollars to keep people in their homes and get them the help that they need with rental subsidies and a right to counsel. We have to build more interim shelters faster, more cost effectively, build more affordable and permanent supportive housing throughout the city, including the 5th District, which I pledged to do. We have to build more housing near the transit stations. And then critically, we have to make better investments in mental health and addiction services. We can't build our way out of the homelessness crisis. We can't arrest our way out of it. We have to serve the people who have unique, customized challenges. And that's where mental health and addiction comes in.
Thank you so much. Now, Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. So the 5th District is the most expensive place to live in Los Angeles. And we need more housing at price points that people who work and live in LA can afford. And we should be building it near our job centers and transportation that people who live in that housing will actually use. So in CD5, that means Century City and Westwood Village and near Cedars, near our big job centers. As a renter myself, I also strongly believe we need to be working hard with our state partners to expand rent control to apply to all housing. Rent is often folks' largest monthly expense, and everyone needs certainty in household budgeting with regards to such a big expense. And rent control creates stability for folks and creates stable neighborhoods. I also support stronger tenant protections, including a right to counsel in eviction proceedings, and think we need a larger emergency grant fund for folks who are on the verge of becoming homeless. We also need to be working with federal partners to expand our Section 8 program and reform it so that it actually works, and doing a better job of preserving our existing naturally affordable housing stock. These are all things that need to be happening at the same time. We can't just be doing one of these things. I was a land use attorney before I went into the nonprofit world. And so I really strongly believe we need to be updating our community plans, which are the guiding documents that say what gets built where. And I'm looking forward to leading that process in Council District 5. In terms of homelessness, there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to be doing. I'm not going to answer it right now because I can't do it in 10 seconds, but I'm hoping that we have another question on homelessness. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, we realize that some of these questions, I mean, these are issues that are very complex. Now let's move on to Mr. Biblars.
I like to think about our housing and homelessness crisis as an iceberg. The street encampments that we live with every day are the very tip of a much, much larger housing iceberg. Beneath the surface of the water are hundreds of thousands of Angelino families on the financial brink, struggling on the brink of eviction or housing precarity. If we're not pushing both levers at once, the street encampments that are above the water and the millions of Angelino families beneath, we are never going to get out of this crisis at its core. That's what I'm about, getting to the heart of the issues. On the affordable housing piece, we will never get out of this crisis 10 units here and 10 units here. We need to be designing and building out a housing production system that naturally produces housing that we can actually afford. Please go to my website and check out our plan for reorienting our housing model and reimagining our urban form so that we are able to meet the demand of the jobs that exist here, especially in Council District 5, which sadly has not often contributed its fair share. Our plan focuses on small scale development along underutilized commercial transit corridors, giving more people the opportunity to live in Council District 5. On the homelessness piece, it's about three things. Getting permanent supportive housing online much more quickly so that we don't waste precious dollars and precious time on interim solutions that sound good in theory and never materialize in practice. It's about cash subsidies to folks who are just on the losing end of an eviction or a bad divorce, who are easier to house than some of the most chronically mentally ill. And third, and perhaps most importantly, it's about serious and robust investments that sustained, ongoing, and methodical street engagement rooted in mental health so that people have real shot at long-term housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Epstein.
It's a very important question, and I'm proud to have the support of Abundant Housing Los Angeles, who trusts me to be a leader on housing reform. We need to do three main things on housing. One is we need to better protect our renters. I was happy to see that the city of LA passed an anti-harassment ordinance, but unfortunately, without a fully funded right to counsel, it will not have teeth. Second, we need to build a lot more housing in CD5, and we need to make sure that the housing that we do build is as affordable as it can be. So that looks like zoning reforms like eliminating parking minimums and allowing the kind of most naturally affordable housing types like duplexes and fourplexes and bungalow courts that are so beloved by Los Angelinos. Second, we need to be investing more public dollars in housing through social housing experiments, like acquisition of rent stabilized properties, which are often poorly maintained. So it's an opportunity to solve a few problems at the same time. On homelessness, first of all, we need to discontinue the decades-long strategy of criminalizing homelessness. This anti-camping ordinance is a whack-a-mole game to move encampments from one place to another. And this is an important differentiator between the candidates. Second, we need well-funded and coordinated outreach to our unhoused neighbors, and we need some place to send them to.
10 seconds.
So that looks like both temporary arrangements, safe parking, safe camping, and permanent supportive housing, which we need to cut the red tape on.
Thank you so much. All right, we move on to our fourth moderator question, and Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky, you will go first on this one. Here we go. The Jewish community is diverse and often misunderstood. Many Holocaust survivors live in poverty. Jews of color are often overlooked in conversations of race. And unfortunately, like all Angelinos, many families in our community experience hunger. How do you plan to address some of these issues? Again, we begin with Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
So this is a really good question because when you're a council member, you represent everybody, and also you're focused on the communities that you're serving, right? And so the Jewish communities of Los Angeles, as you say, are diverse, and their needs are largely reflective of the city's needs more broadly. And so I think one of the best ways of making sure my office in the city is being responsive to the needs of Jewish constituents is by working really closely with Jewish leaders and partners, making sure that I have open lines of communication so that we can pivot resources and attention based on what they're seeing on the ground. So like you said, hunger, homelessness, poverty, concerns around anti-Semitism and public safety. These are all issues that are broader issues too. And so I think, often we tend to say, oh, the Jewish community is this or the Jewish community is that. But like all communities, the Jewish community is not a monolith. It's a series of communities. And, I'm a member of a bunch of different Jewish communities, and we see it every day. And so I think the way we make sure we're being responsive in elected office is by having a really excellent constituent services team, a field team that's out every day, meeting proactively, problem solving, community building. That's how we make sure we're being responsive.
Fantastic, thank you. Next is Mr. Biblars.
Thank you so much for the question. I think it's really important because it reminds us about the internal disparities within our Jewish community. And I think about anti-Semitism in this context as well. Anti-Semitism relies on a series of horrific and flattening tropes about Jews, about wealth, about being puppet masters, all of these horrific tropes that we all know well and that have such longevity. We must always remember the internal disparities within the community, and we must do that in part as a resistance tool to the rising anti-Semitism in our society, in reminding folks that the Jewish community is diverse in every way possibly imaginable. I think about this question running right through the heart of the neighborhoods and built environment of Council District 5. We are so lucky to have two world unique neighborhoods right in Council District 5, Pico Robertson and Fairfax. No neighborhoods like these exist in our country and in our world. But if we're not careful and if we're not acting to ensure that these communities can remain the vibrant hubs of Jewish civic life that they have so long been, they'll disappear. And they are already fraying around the edges. And that question runs right through whether we're going to build a CD5 that is affordable for all folks and especially for Jewish families. We know that Pico Robertson and Fairfax have seen such immense increases in rental costs that long-term residents, including Holocaust survivors, as you're talking about, are being displaced and that they are no longer as welcoming to young and new families. We need to ensure that they remain so if we're continuing to have the thriving Jewish civic life that we've long had here in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Mr. Epstein.
Thank you so much for the question. So no community is monolithic, and certainly the Jewish community is not, as we know well. This question reminds me of my community leadership a bit. One of the things that I was most dogged about as a neighborhood council chair is that my fellow board members not say that your position is against the community. It was so important to me that I put it in the training for new board members, because we are not, the Jewish community is monolithic. Los Angeles is not monolithic, and we need to respect diverse points of view. And just because you disagree with me on an issue doesn't mean you're against the Jewish community or the CD5 community or Los Angeles. So we need to remember that at all levels and at all times. That's just essential to civic discourse, and it's something that I will model as a council member. And I think that you deal with this by centering the inclusive values that most Angelenos share in all of our policymaking. It's about getting as many voices to the table. It's about making sure our policy centers our most vulnerable community members. And that will be a priority of my leadership.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Yebri.
David, I really appreciate you bringing up Holocaust survivors. There are approximately 3,000 Holocaust survivors living in Los Angeles, and they're many of our most vulnerable Angelenos, older, with serious health issues, many on fixed incomes and at risk of losing their homes. I'm really grateful for the incredible nonprofits in the Jewish community that are working to save their stories, and they're all in the 5th District, the Museum of the Holocaust, the Wiesenthal Center, Museum of Tolerance, the Shoah Foundation. I've worked with all of them. You mentioned hunger. About 15 years ago, the Jewish Federation led an initiative to root out hunger in our city. And I was part of that Fed Up with Hunger campaign. And I've worked with local organizations in the community and beyond, Jewish Family Services, JVS, OPK, Tomchei Shabbos, and have chaired initiatives to tackle these issues in our community and beyond. And when Holocaust survivors and others were on the brink of being evicted in Westwood a couple of years ago with Beth Tzedek, I was part of a team to help solve those issues directly. You said Jewish community is a very diverse community. I'm grateful for the Jews of Color Initiative that are giving voice to Black Jews and Iranian Jews, LGBTQ Jews in some communities that have been marginalized. I spoke up more than a decade ago in a very insular part of the Jewish community to make sure that same-sex marriage would be supported in the conservative movement. I've led on these issues. And we talked about also hate crimes have come up too. And it's not just a Jewish issue. This past week, I visited a mosque, a church, and several synagogues to talk about this issue. It's exploding in our city, and I will lead on this issue because
10 seconds.
It's time for someone who comes from the community, who understands that we need to leverage the great nonprofits in Los Angeles if we have any shot of reversing the decline of Los Angeles.
Thank you so much. All right, wonderful job on those 4 moderated questions, everybody. So at this point, we want to turn it over to Bob Horning now. He's the chair of AJC Los Angeles Public Policy Committee to ask their question. Once he asks the question, then I'll take it back and kind of lead you through. And by the way, we will begin this one with Mr. Biblars. But first, let's go to Bob Horning.
Thank you very much. My question for the candidates is as follows. Following last year's Israel-Hamas conflict, the Jewish community here in Los Angeles found themselves the target of severe anti-Semitic harassment and even physical assault. How do you plan to help keep the Jewish community safe in public in our city? Thank you.
Mr. Horning, thank you for the question. And we begin with Mr. Biblars.
Probably the most important question of the night. The single most important job of any elected official is keeping people safe. That is the baseline. Crime makes us feel violated and it makes us feel vulnerable, and everyone deserves to feel safe from that harassment. We have to recognize too that crime is a complex social force rooted in a variety of social forces, and we must proceed accordingly and proactively rather than exclusively reactively. So to start first on the proactive side, in addition to police resources, we need real investments in a suite of proven crime prevention tactics, programs that engage folks in ongoing conversations about hate, about violence. Los Angeles had tremendous success with the Gay and Youth Violence Reduction Program that brought community leaders, trusted, credible messengers, and the police together for frank and ongoing conversations. We need to revive and expand those efforts in the wake of ongoing crime and anti-Semitism. In conjunction with those efforts, we need to work on making our police force better suited to focus on the actual scope of real policing, that is crime prevention and crime investigation. The vast majority of police time is spent on mental health calls, homeless prevention, and crowd control. If we had a police force that was focused on crime prevention, crime and crime investigation, we would all be a much safer city for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Epstein.
Thanks so much for the question. So it's an issue of deep concern. Here's a few things that I think we need to be doing. One is around data reporting. So we need much better reporting and better analysis of hate incident data from LAPD and the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department. And we need to be integrating those various reporting entry points into one unified system. I think that's really important. And given that the LAPD and the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department, we need to properly resource that transformation of data reporting. I also think there's work to be done around education. So one model that is working well, I think, is LA for All's bystander intervention training. And that's something that I would be looking to support and expand. I also think it's really important that City Council and our public safety officers stay on top of international events that may inflame hatred to ensure that we're best prepared to respond. And I will be using my bully pulpit to call out anti-Semitism both on the left and on the right. And I think it's also important that so I think that I'll end it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Epstein. Mr. Yebri.
Bob, I really appreciate the question. When last summer we saw those Jewish diners beaten up outside of Sushi Fumi, I immediately called Greg Martain, who works with Councilmember Koretz. And I was really grateful to see council members' leadership on that issue. When Orthodox kids in the La Brea area were being harassed, I spoke up. And like Scott said, it's imperative to call out anti-Semitism from the right and the left. I've actually done that my entire life as a community leader. And I'm going to continue Councilmember Koretz's focus on public safety. As a father of 4 young kids, nothing is more important to me. And frankly, there's no more important responsibility of local government. That's why I've worked so hard over the last decade to keep my own neighborhood safe. As part of our neighborhood association, I've chaired a public safety committee. I have served on the city's gun violence prevention task force and the city commissioner as well. Our current approach to policing, though, is broken. That's one of the big problems here. We're asking police officers to do everything under the sun, including responding to all types of mental health and homelessness calls that are not the core responsibility of police work. We need to narrow those responsibilities so police officers who are armed and trained can focus on the guns and gangs that are increasing throughout the city, especially in the 5th district. I think we need to improve how we recruit, train, and hold our police officers accountable. I don't think it's binary. I don't think we need to defund the police to keep our neighborhood safe.
10 seconds.
We can keep every neighborhood in the city of Los Angeles safe and build a more accountable, responsible police force. And that's exactly what I intend to do as the next council member.
Thank you very much. Finally, Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
So the rise in anti-Semitism and violence against Jews is terrifying and it's unacceptable. Every day when I drop my kids off at Jewish day school, there's a moment where I worry, and I know I'm not alone. We all deserve to be safe in our communities, and that means safe homes, safe streets, safe businesses. Jewish institutions around the country and the world have invested in security to ensure safety, but it shouldn't fall exclusively to these private institutions to make sure we're safe. We need a well-staffed, well-trained, accountable police department. Officers should be out day in and day out, walking or driving the same beat, developing deep relationships with the communities they serve. And we should make sure we're shifting their duties to actually be focused on crime solving and crime suppression. So moving them away from most homelessness response, most nonviolent 911 mental health calls, et cetera. We need to keep moving those jobs towards social workers and mental health professionals. We also at the same time need to be investing in the communities of Los Angeles and providing deep education around these issues, making sure people understand about other communities and kids are taught about our history and about all the different communities and religions of Los Angeles and more broadly. And the way we build understanding and peace and public safety is through that as well. So education is really important, and continuing to invest in organizations that do that work is also really important.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Debbie Graboff, Board of Director for the Jewish Federation of the Greater Los Angeles. She will ask her question. And by the way, the first person to answer this one will be Mr. Epstein. Debbie Graboff, take it away.
Thank you. One of the unique challenges of the Jewish community is securing houses of worship from potential violent attacks. Nearly 3 years ago, a synagogue in Poway, California, was attacked by a perpetrator who opened fire, killing a worshiper. What will you do to ensure that Jewish institutions are spaces of safety and peace?
Ms. Graboff, thank you very much for the question. We begin with Mr. Epstein.
Thank you so much for the question. It's a real security concern, and I think the way we address it is by partnership between Jewish institutions and governments. We know that sadly our synagogues and Jewish centers are targets, and given the rise in anti-Semitism, unfortunately they probably will remain targets for some time to come. So we need to do all of the work of changing our world, but in the meantime, we have to protect our communities. And so that looks just like close partnership between public and between the public and private sectors on how we can secure these locations. And we need to use a variety of tools, right? Technology like cameras, physical barriers, the presence of people on the streets, both sworn officers and human beings. We need to make our streets safe and vital. We really need to use all the tools at our disposal to make these very special locations in our communities safe. And I will be committed to working with the community to make sure that they are. Thanks so much.
Mr. Epstein, thank you very much. We'll move on to Mr. Yebri.
What makes this question so difficult is that our houses of worship are meant to be welcoming and inviting. And how do we preserve that, but also make sure that it's a safe place for everyone, right? In the short term, we have to make sure that this is a priority for our police department, right? We should invest funding to make sure we prevent and enforce our hate crimes and invest in technology. This is somewhat more difficult in more observant parts of the Jewish community as well, but we can do that. We can figure out ways to interconnect synagogues with neighborhood groups and with LAPD, and that's something that I really want to prioritize, and that will be a focus of my discretionary funding and my public safety platform as well. Longer term, there's a lot of state funding available, not just to quote unquote harden institutions. Our assembly members and our state senators have provided that funding, and some of it's flowing now, not just to synagogues and houses of worship, churches and mosques, but also for schools and other institutions. But the hard work where we need to focus on is to bridge communities, cross-cultural, interfaith work. This is an area where the city has done some work in partnership with the Federation, AJC and ADL and others. And I look forward to being a partner in this work because we have to bring communities together, link arms with other communities, especially the Muslim community, API community, who are at risk right now. And this is really a key job of a council member, is to bring communities together. And I've done this work as a nonprofit leader for almost 20 years.
Thank you. Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
So my office is going to work collaboratively with Jewish institutions, synagogues, schools, nonprofits, organizations like the Jewish Federation and the Community Security Initiative, law enforcement, to keep our communities safe while also continuing to make sure we're welcoming. All of these institutions are welcoming places, and so we need to find that balance. We've been investing in security, right? I see every time I look closely at the JCC, it looks like they've spent more money on upgrading security. And so making sure that our institutions have the resources they need, being a resource, connecting them with state and federal dollars so that they can do what they need to keep their community safe. That's really important. I'm also committed to supporting organizations and holding convenings to strengthen partnerships across faiths. And I'm going to make sure that LA is investing in education. The best way to eliminate hate for the long run is through educating and creating relationships across communities. In terms of education, it's not just about paying for buses so kids can come on tours of the Holocaust Museum, which is really important, but it's also about building it into our curriculum at schools and educating and making sure kids are learning about the Jewish community as well, and how the Jewish experience is part of this larger diversity of Los Angeles, and they understand that's really important for people, and kids growing up need to understand it. So all of this is important, and I'm committed to supporting all of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Biblars.
This question just betrays the sad state of our current world when at a debate like this, we have to have a question in 2022 about protecting Jewish houses of worship in Council District 5. Again, I'm about proactive rather than exclusively reactive approaches to get to the heart of this issue. The organizations sponsoring this debate have pioneered some of the most cutting edge and ongoing anti-hate education campaigns, de-escalation trainings, and preparedness trainings. This cluster of social strength that these groups have pioneered are a necessary component, an essential component of how we are in the long run going to create enduringly safe houses of worship. One of our campaign's big ideas is the creation of an Office of Civilian Neighborhood Safety that works in parallel and in conjunction with police, that does a lot of this work on an ongoing basis: one-on-one violence interruption, anti-hate programming for folks at risk of hate or ongoing violence. These kinds of programs are ultimately and in the long run more effective than more and more calls for greater security, which are absolutely a piece, but they are a necessary but by no means sufficient tool for how we are going to solve this problem. It's about physical security, but we don't want incidents to get to the point of having to rely on physical security. Because when we're at that point, we know the whole slate of social protection that was meant to come before that has failed. We have to talk about this piece, but we have to spend just as, if not more, time talking about everything that comes before. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to our next question. I'd like to welcome Eric Kingsley, past Regional Board Chair of ADL Los Angeles. And by the way, the first person to answer this one will be Mr. Yebri. Mr. Eric Kingsley.
Thank you very much. So my question sort of builds upon the last two questions we had. Hate crimes grew 20% in Los Angeles County in 2020 from 530 to 635 instances. Additionally, according to ADL report, 41% of Americans experienced online harassment in 2021. What do you propose to address the rise of hate against our communities, both in digital and in physical spaces?
We begin with Mr. Yebri.
Well, Eric, I really appreciate this question coming from you, given your service as board chair of the ADL. This has been an area that ADL has pioneered. 20 years ago, I was an intern at the ADL, and I remember work training police officers in terms of anti-Semitism and hate, including online when the beginning of the online boom. And you've been pioneering this work. I think we should increase some of the training, some of the work that you're doing to identify anti-Semitism and hate and bigotry and hate, online hate from every corner, right? And it's imperative for us to call it out on the far left and far right, and we're seeing it more often. We have to reject organizations that support anti-Semitic movements. I think that's incredibly important. We're seeing that more often than ever, that they're becoming mainstreamed and they're taking their hate from online to the real world. I'm proud to be the only candidate who unequivocally stated that I would never accept the endorsement of the DSA, an organization that requires its endorsees not to travel to Israel, abolish pledges seeking to abolish police, and demanding that US withdraw from NATO, right? I think we need leaders who are going to lead by example and identify partners in the community like the ADL to do this work. And we talked a little about this before. We have to prosecute our hate crimes. I know the new DA at first was reluctant to do so, and the ADL led the charge to make sure that perpetrators of the recent hate crimes in 2021 were prosecuted. And thank you for doing that, ADL.
Thank you. Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Thank you. So there's a bunch of work that we need to be doing, and I talked about it in prior answers, but look, training is really important. Helping people know how to respond, how to proactively be working to foster communities where there's mutual respect. It's important for both civilian leaders of Jewish institutions and also law enforcement to have that training. Education is really important, starting all the way in preschool, all the way up through high school and college. We need leaders with credibility to speak out unequivocally whenever there's an act of hate. And I'm committed to working with ADL to shine a light on all of this and make sure that the city council is working in partnership with Jewish community leaders to make sure that we limit it and get to a place where there is no anti-Semitism, where there is no API hate. You know, there are so many communities in Los Angeles that are experiencing different versions of this, and we all need to be working together, learning from each other, partnering together. We're stronger together. And, you know, when we come together and speak with one voice, that's how we're going to root out this insidious hate that's
10 seconds.
suddenly all around us. And I'm committed to doing it in partnership with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Biblars.
To begin, let's combat anti-Semitism with Jewish pride and joy. Where there is darkness, let there be light, and let that be our starting point in response to this question, a pride and joy in identity that we want to share with the world. Hate is on the rise for so many groups, against Jews, against queer and trans people, immigrants, and the AAPI community. Hate of any people has a common source. It is a common rot that we have to ferret out root and branch, and partnering with all sorts of ethnic groups and queer organizations that are working to combat hate is how we ferret out this problem at its core, because it's the same phenomenon and it's happening to so many communities that we should be in solidarity and partnership with. We must call out anti-Semitism vocally and loudly, and we must teach people to identify anti-Semitism, because we know it so often looks and feels different than other forms of racism and white supremacy. That's similarly for queer people. I think of my own experience so often in this race. I can't tell you the number of people who have told me as a gay man, we need a family man to represent Council District 5. That subtle and shaded homophobia is a parallel model of what anti-Semitism looks like. We have to teach Jews and non-Jews alike to look for and call out anti-Semitism. And lastly, on the cyberbullying front, we must partner with LAUSD to fully fund its ongoing cyberbullying initiatives and programs, and most importantly, ensure that they are always inclusive of the Jewish experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Epstein.
No, I think one of the things that makes the Jewish community special is we've always walked in solidarity with other marginalized communities. And so I want to mention a few things. Of course, this is the most Jewish district in the city. It's also, by some measures, will be the highest AAI population in the entire city at about 20%. And that is another group that has experienced a very troubling rise in hate. So this role will be, this seat will be very special in terms of fighting for that community as well, and fighting for all communities. I was proud to be at the Black Lives Matter candidate forum, and I was proud to stand beside Jimmy there. Unfortunately, Sam and Katie weren't there for whatever reason. But we have to make sure that that we stand against all violence against marginalized people. And we can't let the very real concerns around violent crime and hate crime crowd out the important conversation around police violence, which is an epidemic in this city and particularly impacts Black and brown people. And so the way that we fight hate is we fight it everywhere. We fight it in every group, and we stand in solidarity, and I am committed to that work.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that does that for our guest questions. Now, as Jeff mentioned earlier this evening, democracy is not a spectator sport. And by your presence here this evening, and I'm talking about everybody who is watching right now, it's an important step in helping to ensure that there is an informed electorate. Our final long form question sourced from the audience this evening is this, and I will read it to you. And by the way, we are going to begin with Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky. So here's the question. If elected, given the option, which committees would you choose to be on? And what is your expertise or interest to participate in those committees? And we begin with Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Thanks for the question. So there's a relatively recently created committee that is very long. It includes river, sustainability, climate. I want to be on that one. And one of these days I'll remember the full name of the committee. I have almost 20 years experience working on climate and sustainability issues. I think we need an infrastructure geek on the LA City Council, someone who's going to make sure that we're moving Los Angeles in the right direction in terms of sustainability, environmental justice, moving towards decarbonization, electrification, building out our transportation infrastructure faster, leveraging federal dollars, building out a connected bike network. These are all things that I'm committed to doing. The other committee that I'm interested in being on is the homelessness committee and the housing committee. This is the big issue that we're facing as a city, right? And as a former land use attorney, I understand that we're obligated to build the housing we need, affordable workforce housing near our job centers, near our transportation hubs, and to do it in a way where Council District 5, which is a really expensive place where we have most of the jobs, but most of the people who work in those jobs can't afford to live anywhere near where they work. We have an opportunity to make the 5th Council District into a vibrant, healthy, equitable place. And I'm excited to lead the charge on that. So those are the two committees, and also the budget committee. I think it's, the budget is a representation of our values, and it's no committee is more important than the budget committee.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Biblars.
At Harvard, I was lucky enough to be part of an inaugural cohort of professors and graduate students in economics, political science, and sociology who were part of a 3-year-long research intensive funded by the National Science Foundation, single-mindedly dedicated to the study of the rise of income and wealth inequality, especially rampant top-end inequality. And that training was transformational to me to how I think about the intersections of urban problems. My research in particular was about how it intersected with housing and how housing has been so responsible for the rise of income and wealth inequality. I often use a little chart with my hands, and it's, I think, emblematic of so many of the problems here in LA. Over the last 40 years, real wages have remained almost completely stagnant, while the cost of housing has gone up 11 times. The gulf between real wages and the cost of housing can explain so much of the hardship that we see, be it families on the brink of eviction, old seniors who can't afford housing, or ultimately folks who are pushed out onto our streets. That gulf right there is the whole ball game. And making those lines move closer together, the wages and the housing cost line, is the only way we'll create an inclusive and thriving economy. So to that end, I see my position as best suited to the Homelessness and Poverty Committee, the Housing and Planning and Land Use Committees, and the Economic Development and Jobs Committee. I think they are intersectional issues, and I think that graph is illustrative of why we have to be thinking about economic development and jobs deeply in connection with housing and homelessness.
Thank you very much. Mr. Epstein.
The three committees that I'd be most interested in working on would be housing, homelessness and poverty, and transportation. But I'll talk about transportation today because I think we've talked a little bit less about that issue at tonight's forum. And it's a great passion of mine. I've been a leader in the mobility space for a decade. I'm proud to have the support of Streets for All. And transportation policy intersects with a lot of issues. So transportation is the highest emitting sector for carbon in the state. And so if we're going to solve climate change, we need to offer options for people to get out of their cars. And that looks like safe and efficient infrastructure for walking, biking, and transit. It's also a public safety issue. The most likely way that my four-year-old daughter will be killed is by being hit by a car, not by being shot by a gun, unfortunately. And so we need to think about public safety in a broad way, and safe streets is one of the most important interventions to make our city safe. And also, we need to look at transportation policy with the lens of social mobility. So we've talked a lot about housing today, which is really important. The other major line item in folks' budgets is transportation. And so if we can build a city where people don't necessarily have to buy, operate, fuel up, insure cars, and live a car light or car free lifestyle, that can help them save money and move up the social ladder.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yebri.
Well, since the top three issues facing Los Angeles are homelessness, homelessness, and homelessness, I'd want to serve on that homelessness committee at City Council or the related Plum committee, which oversees land use decisions, because we will be measured as council members on how well we tackle with urgency and compassion, common sense, this humanitarian crisis on our streets. The next big issue that I hear about every day from constituents in the 5th District is public safety. And I want to be on that public safety committee to do it right, to get public police reform right, and make sure we have police officers have the resources they need to keep us safe. The budget committee is obviously where the action is. We have an $11 billion budget, and not one of the 15 council members has meaningful private sector experience. I'm the only candidate in this race who's ever started a business, ran a business, paid payroll tax and workers' comp and business tax. We need that kind of experience on the city council, and it's missing. And that's why we're spending $837,000 to build brand new units of a single unit of homeless housing. And if I can get on a 4th committee, it'll be parks and recs and libraries, because that's where my passion is. I spend every weekend with my kids in our local parks throughout the 5th District. I'm on the board of our local library in Westwood, and we need to do more, invest in our libraries, keep them safe, keep them vibrant. Same thing with our parks. There are millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts in Quimby funds that we can spend to improve Rangel Park and Pan Pacific Park and Westwood Park. We got to do better because the residents of the 5th District deserve world-class city services, including parks and libraries.
Thank you very much. Okay, so finally, we're almost to the end here. We have a quick fire round where each candidate will answer, we hope, in 15 seconds or less per question. And 4 quick questions here. The first one will be, and Mr. Biblars starts us off, what do you plan to do the first day you are in office?
Fight to get permanent supportive housing units online much more quickly with a reallocation of state, county, and federal money that we have sitting for homelessness, coupled with serious investments in trained mental health workers who are doing day in, day out, sustained ongoing engagement with street encampments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Epstein.
Number one, we're going to look all across the district for places to do temporary arrangements like safe parking, safe camping, tiny home villages, motel conversions to stabilize the lives of unhoused folks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yebri.
Similarly, I've already identified places that we need to put bridge housing, permanent support housing in the 5th district. I've identified places we need crosswalks and lights in the 5th district where it's extremely dangerous. And third, I've identified places where we're going to put pocket parks throughout the 5th district, including in Palms. I have those lists. I'm going to hit the ground running on day one.
Thank you very much. Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
I'm going to reach out to the two supervisors, the LA County supervisors whose districts overlap Council District 5, and set up standing weekly staff-to-staff calls where we identify each and every unhoused person in the district and what the plan is going to be to get them off the streets. I'm going to reach out to all of my colleagues and get to know them because you can't do anything without 7 of the votes.
Thank you very much.
15 seconds. Yeah.
Next question now. What is your favorite thing about CD5? We begin with Mr. Epstein.
Oh, CD5 is the geographic center of Los Angeles. The Beverly Center is actually what the entertainment industry uses as the center. And so it's an incredibly rich place with amazing restaurants, amazing diverse communities, and a walkable lifestyle. And I want to continue to promote that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yebri.
It's the wonderful diversity of neighborhoods, right? This is a massive district, but you can walk down Melrose and have a wonderful experience, and walk down in Motor and Palms, have a very different one, and the hillside in Santa Monica Mountains and Bel Air, of course, the historic Jewish community down Pico and La Brea as well. Every day you can learn something new and experience something else. And I'm going to add our amazing parks as well and libraries, because those are really close to my heart, and I love our parks in the 5th district.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Yaroslavsky.
I'm going to pick one because that's what you asked. I really love the tar pits, and my kids now love the tar pits. And we were there this weekend and they were rolling down the hill. And I remember doing that when I was a kid. And it just perfectly encapsulates everything wonderful about LA.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Biblars.
I live on Sweetser in between the Grove and the Beverly Center, and I've come to love this part of town. I grew up in Pico Robertson, but I call this area home now. And the fact that I can walk to a bar and a grocery store and 6 museums in Fairfax and so much with just right at my fingertips in this neighborhood, I think is a really special part of town.
Thank you. The next question. Will you support an anti-boycott, divestment, sanctions resolution in the city of Los Angeles? I'll ask that again. Will you support an anti-boycott, divestment, sanctions resolution in the city of Los Angeles? Mr. Yebri.
Yes, absolutely. I think we need to lead with our values. And I believe that by any definition, whether the international one or 3D definition, the BDS movement is anti-Semitic, and we should lead as on the city council, and I will bring that resolution.
Thank you. Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Yes.
Fantastic. Mr. Biblars.
Yes.
Great.
And Mr. Epstein.
Yes, but I want to look at the language because I think that the global BDS movement definitely has anti-Semitism in it. But I think there are folks that are calling for boycotts that are not necessarily anti-Semitic. And I don't think we want to tar and feather everybody who has concerns about the policy failures of the Israeli government.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I covered everybody on that one, right? Rapid fire. So, okay. And finally, final a rapid question. In 3 words, how has being on the campaign been for you personally? Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Engaging, uplifting, and exhausting.
Great, thank you. Mr. Biblars.
Thrilling, edifying, and terrifying.
Great, thank you. Mr. Epstein.
Inspiring, overwhelming at times, and surprising.
Wonderful. And finally, Mr. Yebri.
I love LA.
Great. And we get to the final part now. As we come to a close in this forum, we want to give each candidate the opportunity to provide a closing statement. We will go in reverse order than we began this whole conversation with. And again, please keep your answers to 90 seconds. I will time you. We began with Ms. Young-Yaroslavsky.
Thank you so much to the organizers and to you, David, for moderating. You did a wonderful job. The first and last time a woman held this seat was in 1965, and there are only 3 women on the city council out of 15. Representation matters not only for its own sake, but because of the values and perspectives and priorities I'll bring to the council as a working mom with little kids, as a renter, as someone who struggles to find and afford high quality childcare. Our policies tangibly suffer as a result of this lack of representation. I'm a collaborator, and I'm going to bring an inclusive approach to the city council. My decade in the private sector and 6 years in the public sector have made crystal clear to me that the best solutions come from partnerships between government and communities working together, and I have experience doing this work. I bring an intersectional approach to my work, and I'm committed to making sure those most impacted have seats at the table. I understand that so many of the challenges we're facing are regional and intersectional: homelessness, public health, our economy, public safety, all complex challenges that require nuanced solutions, and people who know how to work across jurisdictions and understand where the money is and how to effectively leverage it is going to be really important. I'm ready to make real progress starting on day one. I know how to do this work because I've been doing this work, and I'm ready to step in and lead, not just on behalf of Council District 5, but on behalf of all Angelenos to make LA more just and healthy. I'm looking forward to partnering with all of you to make our communities into the places we know they need to become. I would be deeply honored and grateful to have your support. Thank you so much for this opportunity tonight.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yebri.
As I said, I love this city. It's a city of endless possibilities. Los Angeles enabled my refugee family to live the American dream. And if elected, I would be the first Iranian American, the first Middle Easterner, the first refugee to hold office in the history of Los Angeles. But for far too long, City Hall has not reflected the energy, creativity, diversity, and integrity that define us as Angelenos. Instead, we've elected the same tired insiders and bureaucrats who are unwilling and unable to challenge the status quo and exercise real leadership, and it shows. And now our city's at a crossroads. We will either continue to decline or chart a new course with new leaders. I'm not a career politician. I'm not from a political dynasty. I'm a husband and father of 4 young kids, raising them just a few blocks from where I was raised here in the 5th District. And I want them, and I want every family to live in Los Angeles that is as vibrant, as affordable, as safe, and as hopeful as the Los Angeles that welcomed my family 40 years ago. I'm proud to have built an unprecedented coalition of business groups and labor, moderates and progressives, Henry Waxman, Nanette Berrigan, Holly Mitchell, and more. And I'm optimistic, or perhaps naive enough, to believe that government in the right hands can actually solve problems, can be a force for good. But I also know that government can't do this alone. To turn our city around, we need leaders like me with business, nonprofit, and civic experience who will partner with and leverage the private sector and great nonprofits like AJC and ADL and Federation. And that's what I've done for 20 years. And that's what I'm going to do as your next council member. I'd be honored to earn your vote when the ballot arrives in 35 days.
Thank you very much. Mr. Epstein.
Thank you so much. You know, the number one lesson I learned in a decade of community leadership is that our stasis in Los Angeles is not for a lack of resources or smart people or good ideas. It's for a lack of political will and the skill in building coalitions for systemic change. That's what I bring. I've brought millions of dollars into my community for safer streets. I've actually created permanent and temporary supportive housing in this district. that is so sparse on those measures. And the other thing that I would say is it's important to elect leaders that understand the challenges that regular Angelenos are going through. I have lived this housing crisis. I've lived in poorly maintained housing with very little leverage to make sure that landlords make the changes that are necessary. My family has only one car, so I get around by bike and bus, and I understand the infrastructure on the ground and how lacking it is. And I'm a public school parent and a working person who has to work at the same time as campaigning. That's the kind of lived experience that we need in the city council. And I will center the needs of our most vulnerable residents every step of the way as your city council member. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Biblars.
Thank you so much to all the organizers of tonight's great debate, and to you as well, David. I have learned over the course of this that the moderator really does make quite a difference in how smoothly these are run. My favorite thing about Jewish communal life is that we love to disagree and to meditate and to ponder and to imagine how our world can be made better. We don't have that spirit enough in local politics, a capacity and a desire and a demand for real disagreement and engagement. When you elect one of the four of us come June 7th, there will inevitably be disagreements no matter who it is. It's not about not disagreeing. It's about having built the trust over time where you make sure your constituents know that they're listened to and valued and that they matter, so that when those inevitable disagreements come up, you can fight it out and still want to go out for drinks afterward. That's what I'm about. That's the kind of approach I bring to politics, and that's the kind of elected leader I plan to be. This city needs new voices. Young people are on the losing end of each of our most pressing problems, be it affordable housing or transportation or the long-term existential threat to our world, climate change. I am a research-driven and data-driven academic that at my core lets the data and the answers guide policy decision-making. I am about what works. That is my North Star. I'm very happy to have been invited to this today, and I look forward to getting to know you all better before June 7th election. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank all of you guys. You have been amazing. I have to say personally, in reading each and every person here's resume, I was impressed by all of you. And this turned out to be exactly what I suspected. Some very great quality candidates who are very intelligent, very ingrained in the community, and very qualified. I want to thank you all for participating today. And that wraps up tonight's candidate forum. I want to thank ADL Los Angeles, the American Jewish Committee Los Angeles, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles for housing tonight's forum. And I want to thank the candidates for answering with honesty and integrity. And I want to thank you, the voters, for participating in tonight's forum. Our democracy is stronger because of your participation. And finally, a friendly reminder that the date of the primary is Tuesday, June 7th, 2022. Don't forget to vote. Get your friends to vote as well. Get your family to vote. This has been fun. I want to wish everybody have a great evening. We'll see you down the line.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.